In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King urges ministers to address citizens' needs on the spot and vows zero tolerance with any attempt to break the law or breach national security. Iraqi forces regain control of Baiji oil refinery as Baghdad asks the United States to stage air attacks on insurgents. Israel rearrests dozens of Palestinians in a stepped-up military operation to search for 3 young Jewish settlers missing in Hebron. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King urged ministers to go to the field to ensure services are provided to citizens, meet their needs and address problems on the spot. King Abdullah said as he chaired part of a cabinet meeting, he wanted to assure all the people that Jordan is strong and had taken all precautions to deal with any regional events to protect its people, borders and national soil. Jordan, he said, is monitoring the region and that the government is in close coordination with the armed forces and security agencies. His Majesty told officials they had the responsibility to ensure commodities are available at suitable prices during the holy month of Ramadan and ensure that civil and military consumer corporations are ready for that task. He urged officials to closely monitor the local market to ensure food safety and commodities are in abundance and at affordable prices. The King noted that the ongoing influx of Syrian refugees would increase the pressure on services across the country, especially in the north, urging officials to maintain services to citizens. He also said the law should be enforced firmly and equally, adding that the law is a red line and that no one is above the law or the state. He also vowed that the country would not tolerate any external or internal attempts to tamper with its security. King Abdullah, who also met Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour, said elevating the performance of the government apparatus is the goal of the white revolution he had called for. He said all plans should be based on a fixed timetable and transparent measurements to keep the citizens well informed. His Majesty the King welcomed President of the Jordanian-French Parliamentary Friendship Committee, Christian Carmen, and Senator Christian Contat. The meeting at the Husseiniya Palace focused on political tension in the region and ways to further strengthen ties between Jordan and France. King Abdullah spoke about milestones achieved in Jordan's political reforms, including the launch of new initiatives to enhance democracy, transparency, and public participation in decision-making. On regional turmoil, the King said finding a political solution in Syria would only end the suffering of the Syrian people and preserve the country's unity. He also referred to the huge burden Jordan shoulders as a result of hosting a growing number of Syrian refugees, urging the international community to support the kingdom in this humanitarian endeavor. King Abdullah urged the parties to the Palestinian-Israeli peace process and the world community to help achieve a just and comprehensive peace based on the two-state solution. The King warned that unilateral Israeli actions targeting Jerusalem and its holy shrines would have an adverse impact on peace efforts. King Abdullah also said Iraq's unity and stability should be preserved through an inclusive political process. The lower house passed the 2014 draft investment law in a session chaired by Speaker Atif Tarawne and attended by Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour. The lawmakers re-voted on a number of articles in the bill that they had endorsed in previous sessions. Among these was the lease or sale of real estate inside free developmental zones to any major developer, but only after cabinet approval of the development agreement. Prime Minister Mansour told the lawmakers that the main idea of the investment law is to ease procedures for the investors, not to complicate matters. Mansour said the government's vision on investment promotion and removing barriers to foreign capital had been met by the new legislation, which he called a huge leap for investment growth in the country. The House was also adamant to abolish the Investment Commissioners Board from the bill to get rid of red tape and ensure that decisions related to investment are dealt with promptly. Foreign Minister Nasser Joudeh said the Islamic world is facing enormous challenges that require close cooperation to address them. Jude was addressing his counterparts from the Muslim world during a ministerial meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in the Saudi city of Jeddah. He said failure to achieve the two-state solution between the Palestinians and Israel is the reason behind regional instability and would threaten world peace and security. The minister urged the parties to work for the resumption of Middle East peace talks and stop unilateral Israel policies, including the building of settlements and violations against Jerusalem. Her Majesty Queen Rania attended the launch of Oasis 500's new investment track, the Creative Industries Fund, which will support and invest in artistic and cultural entrepreneurship. The Queen inaugurated and toured the Oasis 500 Entrepreneurial Talent Exhibition, which included 20 artistic creations by 20 different Jordanian startups. Queen Rania reviewed the ideas behind the different projects, which ultimately aim to harvest, through the medium of arts and culture, sustainable and income-generating projects that serve national economic development. Queen Rania met the artists who participated in the exhibition and expressed her admiration of their work. Following the tour, the Queen watched a presentation explaining the goals and ambitions of the new fund, which was launched in cooperation with the King Abdullah II Fund for Development. Her Majesty pointed out that the art scene in Jordan has great potential in contributing to the development of the economy. Iraqi forces regained control of Beiji oil refinery north of Baghdad. Iraq asked the United States to stage air attacks on insurgents who have seized large swathes of territory in the north. This report has more on the evolving crisis.
1 week after sectarian violence that saw militants seize northern cities. The latest target in the sweep by insurgents of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, was Iraq's largest oil refinery in Beiji, using machine gun fire and mortars. Baghdad said its armed forces have regained full control over the refinery after the ISIL took control of 3/4 of the installation. The insurgents were also beaten back from the village of Bashir, south of the city of Kirkuk, after clashes with local militia and police forces. Prime Minister Nour al-Maliki warned the violence gripping the country will not end at Iraq's borders, but will spill over into other regions. Maliki has met Sunni and Kurdish political opponents, concluding with an appeal for national unity. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said his country will not hesitate to defend Shiite Muslim holy sites in Iraq. Rouhani's comments came as world powers continue talks in Vienna on Iran's nuclear program, at which the two sides remain far apart over the future scope of Iranian nuclear activity. British Prime Minister David Cameron said the insurgents fighting in Iraq were planning to attack Britain, and that ungoverned spaces where militants thrived had to be shut down. But he said Britain could not afford to stand on the sidelines.
We need to take a consistent approach with all the players in this region, which is to say that we support the voices of moderation, the voices that support democracy, inclusive government, pluralistic politics under the rule of law. And we need the Iranian government to play that role as well as everybody else.
U.S. House Speaker John Boehner said he does not think the United States should reach out to Iran for help in defeating the Sunni insurgency.
The government of Iraq clearly is not the most effective government. They've had their challenges in terms of understanding how to run a free society and a government that's open.
Boehner told reporters at the U.S. Capitol that he hoped to hear from President Barack Obama on a broader strategy for Iraq. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
Israel's military pressed ahead in an intensive search for 3 settlers it said were kidnapped in the occupied West Bank last week. Israeli leaders have arrested over 240 Palestinians in the past 6 days during a security crackdown that was condemned by an Israeli rights group as a collective punishment. We get more in this report.
Israeli troops raid more Palestinian towns and villages on the 6th day in a search and arrest operation across the occupied West Bank. These soldiers are looking for 3 Jewish settlers who went missing in the southern West Bank last week and believed to be abducted. Military forces carried out house-to-house searches and imposed travel bans in many parts of the occupied West Bank. They rearrested 51 Palestinians freed in 2011 prisoner swap deal. That brings to at least 240 the number of those detained since the search began. Israel has accused Hamas group of kidnapping the seminary students who disappeared last Thursday while hitchhiking close to a Jewish settlement. An Israeli human rights group and Palestinian call Israeli operation collective punishment. The director of B'Tselem, an Israeli group which monitors human rights in the West Bank, said Israel must consider international law when taking action.
Obviously, the efforts to locate the missing Israeli teenagers are understandable, and hopefully they will be fruitful. At the same time, blanket, open-ended travel restrictions on entire Palestinian communities are unacceptable. Further steps such as preventing Palestinian workers with work permits from entering Israel amount to collective punishment.
This Hebron resident also says Israel is punishing ordinary Palestinians collectively. What did the 800,000 residents of this city do? He asked. They cannot move around, they cannot travel. Another resident agreed, saying the situation is terrible and the people are worried about the days ahead. Abu Nasser, a Hebron truck driver, says that for 2 days he was not able to leave the city due to road closure. Israeli officials say they want to make clear to Hamas that it will pay a high price for the abduction. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised the latest arrests, and the military said the operation would continue.
Over the last 5 days we've arrested over 200 people. Just last night we arrested 50 Hamas affiliated people that were released in the Shalit agreement. And yes, they are arrested and they're being taken and detained until further notice.
Qaddura Faris, chairman of the Palestinian Prisoner Club, which advocates on behalf of Palestinians in Israeli jails, said Israeli actions are more about revenge than security. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said those responsible for the kidnapping had only brought an Israeli military crackdown upon Palestinians. Hamas criticized the comments but said it is committed to a Palestinian reconciliation deal signed in April. Farah Ajluni for the News at 10.
Meanwhile, Israel gave approval for the construction of 172 new homes for Jewish settlers in the settlement of Abu Ghneim in occupied East Jerusalem. Jerusalem City Councillor Youssef Pepe Alalu of the left-wing Meretz Party, which opposes settlements, broke the news of the latest expansion. On July 5th, Israel unveiled plans for building 3,200 settler homes in East Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank. The announcement drew furious reactions from the Palestinians and the international community, with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon urging Israel to freeze its settlement activity. Israel's settlement building is viewed as a key obstacle to a peace deal with the Palestinians. Iran and 6 world powers held the first plenary session in a new round of nuclear talks, intensifying work on the draft of the final agreement. Based on an interim deal reached in Geneva last November, Iran and the 6 nations are trying to find a final solution to the dispute over Iran's nuclear issue by July 20th. The European Union, host of the ongoing talks, said all the parties involved have realized the importance of accelerating the negotiating progress, as only 1 month is left before the deadline.
This morning, in the first plenary session of this particular negotiating session, there was work done on elements of the text that could be part of an agreement. So obviously, as it looks, things are getting very intensive now, and we're hoping to make some serious progress.
Tunisia's Prime Minister Mahdi Jum'a said elections in his country will take place before the end of the year. He spoke after talks in Berlin with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, which also dealt with security issues in the troubled region. Tunisia's election authority has proposed a parliamentary vote on October 26 and the first round of presidential polls a month later. The elections mark the final step towards full democracy. Tunisia has been run by a caretaker government that saw through the adoption of a new constitution lauded as a model of democratic evolution in an unstable region. Jum'a pledged the polls will be open and transparent.
I
can tell you that the election will be taking place. The necessary elections will take place by the end of the year. This will be ratified by the Constituent Assembly. The elections will be transparent and open for election monitors. With this, we will take Tunisia further in this great democratic exercise.
Security was tight in Porto Alegre as final preparations were underway for the World Cup Group B match between Australia and the Netherlands. Expectations for the Netherlands were high following their 5-1 demolition job of title holders Spain in the opening game, and they did not disappoint their fans by beating Australia 3-2. The Dutch victory all but guarantees the Netherlands a place in the round of 16 barring some high-scoring results. However, the loss for Australia could mean they should start thinking about their long journey home. As for last night's game between Brazil and Mexico, World Cup favorites Brazil were held to a 0-0 draw by Mexico as goalkeeper Guillermo Ochoa produced an inspired performance to deny the Brazilians their 11th victory in a row. In an absorbing Group A match, Brazil failed time and again to break down a stubborn Mexican defense. Ochoa made a series of reflex saves, denying the Brazilians what seemed like certain scores. At the other end, the Mexicans had a few decent chances in another entertaining game and could have snatched a victory had their long-range efforts been more accurate. The draw means that to make the second round of the tournament, both teams need points from their final group games on June 23rd when Brazil faces Cameroon and Mexico meets Croatia. And finally, fair tonight with northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperatures expected. Therefore, it will be hot across the country, especially in the Badia and Jordan Valley. Winds will be northwesterly moderate to brisk and dusty. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a warm night and hot day tomorrow with northerly winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King urges ministers to address citizens' needs on the spot and vows zero tolerance with any attempt to break the law or breach national security. Iraqi forces regain control of Beiji oil refinery as Baghdad asks the United States to stage air attacks on insurgents. And Israel rearrests dozens of Palestinians in a stepped-up military operation to search for 3 young Jewish settlers missing in Hebron. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.